difference a day makes, right? You were
Hello,
wonderful. I
everybody.
couldn't tell.
Welcome back to my LinkedIn Lives. I'm Jasmine Navarro, certified wellbeing expert, working with educational institutions and companies, helping them support their family wellbeing challenges. And as you know, every week I interview different experts who make a difference. And today I am super excited to be interviewing Carrie again. Hi, Carrie. Thank you so
Hi,
much for coming.
thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No, I mean, I loved our conversation last time. It's never enough time, but can you tell us about yourself and what you do?
Sure, absolutely. I'm Carrie Torres. I'm a mental health counselor, and I also own a very small private practice called Inside Out Counseling. I specialize in OCD and anxiety disorders and perinatal mental health. So, perinatal mental health will be the pregnancy period and postpartum period, which we do see some onset of OCD during that time period, or additional anxiety or stressors that come with being pregnant or a new parent. So, that's my area of specialty. And I work with adolescents and adults.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Carrie.
Sure.
And we've had so much, I've had so many questions and comments already about your
Great.
topic today. I think it's such an interesting and important topic. So you chose OCD and how we treat it. Can you explain exactly what that means and why you chose it for today?
Yeah, I think the most important part is like why I chose it. It's because can be very significant mental health condition, and it's also very misunderstood. So one of my passions is really increasing awareness. Individuals who live with OCD go untreated for a decade or longer, and so they suffer silently, often not knowing what's going on, or they're mistreated. So it's not uncommon that I have clients being treated for trauma for 5 years or panic disorder, and it's OCD. So it's really my passion is just to increase awareness, whether it's for providers out there, nurses, doctors, other therapists, and for people to understand what's happening, because once you know what's going on, you can treat it. There's great interventions that treat OCD. And so that's why I chose it to
Brilliant.
talk about
And can you explain what, for some people who don't know, what OCD stands for and what is it exactly?
Yeah, so OCD stands for obsessive compulsive disorder, and it has basically two parts. We have obsessions and compulsions. Obsessions are going to be unwanted, intrusive. They can be thoughts, they can be urges, they can be sensations. They come against somebody's will, they can come out of nowhere, and they cause significant distress. So there's a big emotional response. It can be anxiety, it can be guilt, it can be shame. And when that feeling is so overwhelming, there are compulsions to alleviate that. I mean, we have our whole built-in fight or flight, and our amygdala is there to protect us. That's, part of our brain, and it rings the alarm. The problem is the brain, the amygdala, gets the message wrong, and there's not a true threat. It's somebody's thought, and we say it's just a thought. So the brain is saying, oh my God, there's something seriously wrong here, because there's a misinterpretation of that thought, that feeling, that sensation. And then to alleviate that, one would engage in compulsions. There can be mental compulsions, physical compulsions, avoidance. There's safety behaviors. So there's avoidance is anxiety's best friend. We see anxiety, is very close to OCD, but there's basically these different compulsions that people engage in. The problem with compulsions is that they feed and maintain the OCD. So we'll kind of talk about one therapy there a little bit later, but that's basically OCD in a nutshell.
Wow, it's so interesting, so interesting. And you mentioned before about some people, I don't know if you want to talk about this bit now as well, about the difference between OCD and trauma.
Yeah, well, trauma is very different. And OCD there can be experiences with OCD that are traumatizing. But if I think about, there's an event with trauma, it can be like a a single event. It can be ongoing. So complex trauma, that's an anxiety disorder. Obsessive compulsive disorder used to be an anxiety disorder, but it no longer is. It's in its own category. So trauma is going to be more, there's going to be, definitely anxiety that goes, there's going to be triggers. We see commonalities, but it's going to be a lot of avoidance. And it's not, so it might be an image that flashes and then, or take somebody back to the traumatic event, where OCD is really focused in, it's more, how do I describe the difference? OCD is going to be not related to trauma. There's no specific
It doesn't
event.
have to be something.
Yeah. Let's kind of say that something, somebody could have a specific event where it looks like trauma, but then they start to think, oh, I feel like I don't feel well. Am I, going crazy, for example? This could be an obsession. And then they start engaging in these compulsions, but there's going to be more compulsions than where trauma is going to be more related to like safety behaviors and a lot of avoidance and things like that.
And when you say compulsions, you mean like those strong urges?
Yeah, these are going to be acts that one does to alleviate the distress from the obsession. So like mental compulsion could be counting. It could be trying to replace what someone considers a bad thought with a good thought. So you don't really know what's going on. Somebody could look very distracted. They could be singing a song in their head. There's so many different mental compulsions. Reassurance, self-assurance. So there's an intrusive thought, image, urge that's really scary. And they'll say, oh, you're going to be fine. You won't do that. That could be a mental compulsion. Physical is what we hear more maybe in social media, but it could be washing hands. It could be seeking assurance from somebody else. There's all different physical compulsions. It just depends. And OCD is so unique and nuanced, and it's really the individual. So it's about learning. There's no two identical. We see a lot of themes, and overlaps, but really you have to learn what the individual person is experiencing.
Wow. So it could be something like, so for example, so it could be like a worry. Could it be like a worry, or is it intrusive thought? So
yeah, well, it can lead worry. So again, there's lots of overlaps. I think about worriers is generalized anxiety. Worrying about that would be worrying about lots and lots of different things. So it can, in that, what commonality can be rumination. So rumination can be a compulsion as well. It's when we ruminate, we're either intentionally trying to solve something. That's a big rumination, right? Like, what am I going to say? What am I going to do on the podcast? And I'm thinking through all the possibilities. With OCD, it's all imagined. So there's this point where we use our imagination. It's how we go through life, but we also have perception here and now. Our sense is what we see. With OCD, I think about two bubbles, and they should be a little bit crossed over. Imagination takes over with OCD. What if, could be, maybe. And now we start to ruminate about, what if I upset that person? What if I cause them harm, or I said something and they're really like suffering because of that? That's imagined. Did they look upset? No, they said goodbye. They, we're meeting next week. So then they might start to imagine and replaying the situation, going over and over. And so it's,
so that's the obsessive bit, and the compulsion bit is
the rumination.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So now they have a thought. What if so let's say they, somebody is worried about that they hurt somebody's feelings or said something offensive. That would be the intrusive thought. What if, maybe, could be.
Okay.
And then the compulsion would be one, for example, in this situation, could be replaying in their head mentally their conversation. A physical compulsion in response to the intrusive thought could be texting. Oh, hey, did you have fun? Looking for assurance, seeing if the person's mad. So they're very different. An intrusive thought, think about it, comes out of nowhere. It causes distress. And then what are our actions?
But could it, like when you said it was imagination, but maybe you have just met that friend. So it's sort of come out of nowhere, but
Mhm.
it came from somewhere in a way, because you did meet that friend. It's not
Yeah.
like it just came
Mhm.
from absolutely nowhere.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So this is interesting because there's two different treatments we'll talk about. There's exposure and response prevention and inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy. With that's ICBT, that really looks at the reasoning process and it gets flawed and it gets faulty. So they're two very different therapies and both
Oh,
evidence-based, but they're going to have different approaches. ERP doesn't, it says the doubt, the obsession is irrelevant. We use that to do exposures and we use it has a purpose, where ICBT is going to say, hey, this doubt is not irrelevant and it came from somewhere. So it looks
oh
at that,
wow.
but the reasoning process gets faulty. Again, you met somebody you don't know, but maybe the friend sent you an email saying, hey, I really loved meeting. I'd love to get together again. Okay, that's in the here and now. That tells me, what do you have in your senses? They're telling me they enjoyed themselves. But if somebody with OCD might start to think, well, maybe they're just saying that because they're being nice, or maybe they didn't really,
Oh
when
no.
they look, they, and then it's called the doubting disorder is OCD's nickname. So it's always, you can't argue with it. It'll start, you say, well, no, they sent that. Well, OCD, are you sure? Remember when they were checking their phone, they looked really bored. And it's this ongoing
Wow.
dialogue mental, like in
Nightmare.
your, yeah.
And no, thanks for explaining
Mhm.
that. And before we get on to the treatment, because I know that's what we're
Sure.
talking about. So I don't know. I don't think you've answered this. I don't think we've discussed this. But what causes OCD? Like,
Oh,
are people born with it, or does it just come
right.
from somewhere?
Yeah, good question, right? Like, where do these things come from? Well, with most mental health conditions, we don't totally entirely know, but we've got some pretty good um, indications. So one could be genetic. And we
Okay.
often will see that a family member, and my clients might not notice it. And a lot of times, family members are untreated. They've never seen anyone. But once my clients have a diagnosis, then they'll say, oh, yeah, now I can see definitely mom or an uncle. So we have genes, right? We're just what we're dealt, the genes that we're given. We also see this. A chemical imbalance, and there's serotonin, which is a chemical that's really important for functioning. And serotonin, they're seeing that there's an imbalance with this, and I think this is why women who are pregnant, postpartum, there's such a fluctuation in their chemicals, their hormones. And so 80% of moms and even dads, they're not going through that, but it's a big life change, are going to have intrusive thoughts. What if the baby stops breathing in the night? Well, then we're checking,
Mm.
the compulsion would be to check the baby 30 times. Could be you're not sleeping now, right? So you're having the monitor, you're listening to it. That would be an intrusive thought. So there's, and then anxiety sensitivity is another one, which we see that, like I always say, hey, somebody has a response to this intrusive thought. And if your body responds like much more intensely, and that anxiety is threatening, like similar with panic disorder and panic attacks, people fear their body's response. There's anxiety sensitivity there. So those are some of the causes that we're seeing.
Wow, wow, this is so complex, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, going to the best treatments then. So what do you think, in your experience, are the best
Yeah.
treatments for
Yeah,
OCD?
well, definitely OCD, you want a proper diagnosis and you want to treat it either with exposure and response prevention therapy. So this is the gold standard still today, and it's very very specific. So I'd mentioned some of my clients have been receiving therapy, almost like talk therapy, and that can actually make OCD worse,
Oh,
and they don't
really?
get better. Yeah. Yes, and I've seen that with my clients where I'm not like 3 years, 5 years seeing a therapist and not getting better, and then they come and we start working with exposure and response prevention, and we start seeing results a month, 2 months, 3 months. I mean, it's amazing. It really is amazing. So the right treatment is important. Exposure and response prevention is basically, because there's such an avoidance piece and there's this fear, we have this intrusive thought or urge or sensation that scares us for whatever reason. Well, we kind of know the reason. There's a feared vulnerable self that's more ICBT. But
Yeah.
Then there's a consequence. Well, what if that came true? And so this is really distressing. So what we do is we do exposures very strategically, face the things that we fear. And there's a whole process to it. It's very collaborative. There's lots of work leading up to it. All the therapies are I do a lot of psychoeducation. So I think that piece. And then the response prevention is we start to remove the compulsions, and that the compulsions are going to keep OCD alive. It's like feeding a hungry monster. It gets bigger and stronger as you're engaging in these compulsions. So we call that like the secret marinara sauce of the pasta, the dish. It's like stopping those compulsions. So that's exposure and response prevention.
How can you tell us? I mean, you explained it so well, but I don't know in more simple terms. So somebody would come to you and they've got a problem with, I don't know, washing their hands or something, and then so what would you do?
Yeah. So to begin with, let's see. Yeah. So in washing hands, maybe there are contamination. So first, we're going to do a full eval, and an evaluation. So an intake. I'm just gathering information. I'm learning about what intrusive obsessions they have. Normally, OCD is pretty sprinkled around, but there's a core fear and a core belief. So we've got all these. Could be different subtypes at the top. Everything leads to a core fear. Am I a bad person? What if I harm my baby, like accidentally? Like I feed them something that was moldy, and then the consequences, I couldn't live with that guilt if they end up in the hospital. So we need the intake and the gathering data and learning. And I say that's an exposure within itself, because these are things that are scary, and to talk about them does cause anxiety. So I always say those early, sessions, they're an exposure. We're talking about it. And then what we would do is I particularly like to start with listing all of the compulsions. And then I have a worksheet that someone fills out to find the mental compulsions. A lot of people don't even know what's a compulsion. So it's education, it's building insight. Like, this is what we need to stop. And so then I particularly like to start with reducing compulsions. Hey, what if we take this off? And that can be an exposure too within itself, right? If somebody, you mentioned washing their hands. I'm trying to see here. Assurance is a big one. So let's say somebody is over confessing. They're in a relationship. They have relationship OCD, and they're over confessing everything that they think or are doing. That's a compulsion. We would stop that behavior, and we'd work on it, on how to, there's ways that I give clients tools, but it's basically a ban. We're not going to do that, or we're going to wait 15 minutes to do it, or an hour if it's really hard.
Okay.
But we just start to put bans, and okay, are you agreeing to not do this anymore? Okay, then that becomes a ban. And if it's really hard not to do that, then we track, resist, and submits. An exposure. So I was just doing an exposure yesterday where a client feels that a loved one's harm's going to come to them. The trigger is flying. A loved one is going to be flying. So they worry that what if they die in a plane crash? We've had a lot of plane crashes in the US lately. So
there's been a lot. Yeah.
Everywhere. Right. We looked at planes that had crashed, but we start with a plane that was kind of landed and it looked fine, but it was not on the runway. And then we track the distress. And so there's a couple different models involved. It gets a little bit complicated, but habituation and a learning model, inhibitory learning model. I mix the both of those, because what we fear, anticipation to happen, almost never does. So by doing an exposure and facing it and thinking about it, we just basically disprove our fears. One of the fears is not that, the plane, it still may crash, but they won't be able to stop worrying about the plane crashing. So we actually go to it. It's like facing your fears head on, and they resolve.
You visualize it. How? By visualizing.
We actually, in this particular case, an exposure I did, we looked at plane crashes. And then I say, okay,
Oh,
what's OCD saying? What's OCD is going to get really loud. And it's like, okay, then I kind of walk them through. OCD generally wants you to do something like, hey, tell them to turn that picture off, or I'm going to call my loved one and tell them not to fly. It's like, okay, tell OCD you're not listening to them. We're not letting
wow.
them. So that's a little bit about exposure and response prevention.
Wow, it sounds so interesting and difficult as well. What so and the other one is
Yeah.
kind of the opposite. The other one's the opposite where
Yeah. So inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy is basically where it's more cognitive based, where exposure and response is a behavioral. We're changing our behaviors and we're tolerating distress. And by tolerating distress, what we see is once we sit with it, distress and anxiety always come down. They only maintain like in these situations by our behaviors. So ERP is going to focus on the anxiety, tolerating it, or guilt, or whatever the feeling is that's uncomfortable, and stopping certain behaviors. Inference based cognitive behavioral therapy looks at the faulty reasoning process that leads to an obsession, and we dismantle that. So we have like an OCD cycle or an OCD sequence, which could be trigger, obsessive thought, intrusive thought, a consequence if that were to come true, anxiety, compulsion. So
wow,
inside there's that's the inner circle. So we've got this sequence of how OCD portrays itself. What maintains that in ICBT that we focus on is the faulty reasoning behind it. There's an obsessional story that we look at and identify what story is OCD telling you that's been repeated
yeah,
over and over. And then then there's the real vulnerable fear itself. And so we have this fear, what if I go crazy? Okay, so this could be an intrusive thought. It could be a vulnerable like fear too. And then we look at what's the true you. So we look at the fear itself and the true self, but it's dismantling. It's really from a cognitive, a thought, more of a thought process and challenging that.
wow. Yeah, there's so many questions I
Yeah.
want to ask you.
Okay.
Right,
Yes.
we've got a question from Karen on Instagram. Hi, Karen, how are you doing? She says, oh wait, I can't even see the question. Oh yeah, do people with OCD always need medication, or are there other ways to manage it? I mean, you
Oh,
have
that's an
mentioned.
awesome question. No, you don't. So here's the interesting thing. ERP, exposure response prevention, has the exact same results as medication does alone. So,
Oh,
and the only difference is with medication, if you only do medication and no therapy, it's a band-aid. When you stop the medication, OCD is going to go back to where it was. It returns. ERP, you're actually being trained to be your own therapist. It's a way of changing your life. So it's like brushing your teeth. But the results we have great research with exposure and response prevention. Results are the same. I recommend medication if my clients are really 8, 9 out of 10 anxiety. They're having a hard time engaging in the therapy. And that's at that point, I might say, hey, this might make it let's dull some of this stuff so you can do the therapy, but not necessary.
brilliant. We've got a question from Paul. Hi, Paul, how are you doing? He says, what advice would you give to someone who feels nervous about starting therapy?
Oh, I always say, and this is even on my website, the first step is often the hardest. But really try to think you're already suffering so much. My clients suffer so much, and
Yeah,
you find somebody, you're going to go on this beautiful journey together, and you're going to be completely supported. And you think about the long run, like, okay, what's the long, 6 months, a year, this is going to be the rest of your life that you will see significant change. I do a treatment plan. My clients, we aim for a 20% reduction in 3 months. So, and that can
brilliant.
be much more, but yeah, I guess.
Oh, brilliant. No, thanks, Carrie. I mean, we're running out of time, but I mean, there's so many things we want to ask. But is there anything else you want to talk about before we finish?
Yeah, I think resources. So really for folks out there, if something's sounding similar, there are so many subtypes, there's so many overlaps of subtypes, but the International OCD Foundation, so IOCDF.com is a wonderful resource, and you can find everything and anything there on different subtypes. There's a podcast, Your Anxiety Toolkit, Kimberly Quinlan, I really love. You can go through there. She's an OCD anxiety expert, and we'll focus on different subtypes. Also, my website, iocounseling.com, has blogs and resources and books, and a way to contact me too.
No, you write lots of amazing articles and blogs, actually. But yeah, can you put all of those links on the post?
Right here in the chat, or on the LinkedIn post?
Yeah, on the LinkedIn, because this is StreamYard, so it won't go. Actually, on the post, all of your links and everything. And if you have any, especially your articles, because I know you write some amazing articles about this.
Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Carrie. Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you everybody for joining. I'm sure there's going to be more questions coming. So if anybody still has any questions or comments, please feel free to message Carrie or put a question on the post, and Carrie or myself can get back to you.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much, Carrie. It's absolutely lovely to see you. It wasn't enough time. We have to meet again and do another one. But yeah, thank you so much. Is there one word to finish with? Just one word to say before we go?
You can feel better. You don't, this is not a life sentence. Treatment works. And I love working with my clients because I get to see them come in really distressed and get better. So definitely there is treatment.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Carrie. Thank you, everybody. And I will see everybody next week.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Thank you so much, Carrie.